Hello and welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're joining us on NewsX World. Let's get started with the headlines this hour. China's President Xi Jinping arrives in Cambodia to conclude a three-nation tour amidst global trade tensions. Cambodia seeks increased Chinese investment as Xi promotes regional stability amidst U.S. tariffs. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and envoy Steve Witkoff meet European leaders in Paris to discuss Ukraine's ceasefire and Iran nuclear deal. Ukrainian officials arrive unannounced to urge tougher U.S. stance on Russia after deadly strike in Sumy. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has met Trump in Washington, seeking to protect EU trade. With 67 billion euros in exports at stake, she pushes for a zero-tariff deal as Rome slashes its growth forecast. US and Ukraine make significant progress towards a minerals agreement to boost economic ties and support Ukraine's recovery. Ukraine's first Deputy Prime Minister confirms plans to sign a deal soon, marking a step forward in the bilateral partnership. Reports coming out of Gaza say that Israeli airstrikes hit displaced Palestinian camps, killing at least 37. The deadliest strike in Khan Yunis killed 16 and wounded 23. Other attacks in Beit Lahia and near Al-Mawasi killed 9 more. Trump meets Japan's trade envoy and says they're making great progress. However, Japan fails to secure an immediate tariff relief as he claims over 75 countries are seeking U.S. trade relief deals. Asian stocks edge up while the dollar firms slightly amidst US-Japan trade talks and Fed Chair Powell's warnings on tariff-induced slowdowns. Tech shares remain under pressure following negative forecasts, with investors awaiting TSMC earnings for industry insights. Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman arrives in Tehran for high-level meetings just days before crucial Iran-US nuclear talks in Rome. The visit signals a potential shift in regional diplomacy as Saudi Arabia engages directly with Iran. The White House has made it clear that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Salvadorian man wrongly deported from the United States, will never live in the United States again. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that if Garcia returns, he will be immediately deported. Leavitt also accused Garcia of being an MS-13 gang member and a domestic abuser, citing a 2021 restraining order filed by his wife. Here's what Caroline Leavitt had to say.
If he ever ends up back in the United States, he would immediately be deported again. Nothing will change the fact that Abrego Garcia will never be a Maryland father. He will never live in the United States of America again.
Meanwhile, U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen's visit to El Salvador to meet with Garcia was blocked by authorities. Van Hollen arrived on Wednesday hoping to advocate for Garcia's release, but Vice President Felix Ulloa denied his request to visit or speak with Garcia, claiming the U.S. is paying for his incarceration. Van Hollen condemned the action, calling it an illegal abduction. Here's what Van Hollen, U.S. Senator of Maryland, had to say.
I would do everything I could to get him out of CCOT. And I won't stop trying, and I can assure the President, the Vice President, that I may be the first United States Senator to visit El Salvador on this issue. But there will be more, and there will be more members of Congress.
The case has sparked off a legal battle, with the U.S. Supreme Court directing the Trump administration to secure Garcia's return, acknowledging the deportation was an error. However, El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele has refused to send Garcia back. Quinton A. Hitchcock, American political consultant, is joining us live from Houston in the United States. Thank you very much for being with us today. How do you react to this fresh controversy over Garcia? Reportedly, it was a mistake, but now the U.S. administration claims they will not have him back in the U.S.
Well, good evening to you. Thank you for having me. The White House is not walking away from this. They're not budging from this at all. It's important to realize that there's two sides of this, according to them. The first side is that no legal authority in the United States, no court, not even the Supreme Court, has the authority to influence foreign policy. So recently, the Supreme Court unanimously upheld a decision for our country to facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia. The White House is not abiding by that whatsoever. The second side of this, and I think the side that's becoming much more of a political issue in this country, is the fact that on one side, we have the White House, we have the El Salvadorian president, we have some of our intelligence agencies that have all said that Mr. Garcia is connected to organized crime and violent terrorist groups and violent gang activity in El Salvador. Now, on the other side, Senator Van Hollen, a lot of the Democrats in this country, and much of this country is wanting to say, okay, if that's the truth, show us some evidence, show us some proof. And right now, at least the public has not been made privy to any such allegations or any such proof that Mr. Garcia is connected to a terrorist group.
Yes. Also, Quinton Hitchcock, what do you make of the fact that, an American legislator reportedly tried to meet him, but to no avail? That meeting reportedly did not take place, even though he traveled to El Salvador.
Not surprising, given just a few days before that, the president of El Salvador was in the Oval Office meeting with Trump. So not surprising. That individual, much of the El Salvadorian government has also been on record saying that they will not be releasing him, that they do consider him a terrorist, and that's why he's going to stay behind bars in El Salvador. This really is coming down to one thing, and I might add for your viewers just how sensitive of a political issue this has become, at least in this country. And it really comes down to one thing, and that's due process. I don't think anybody out there is complaining that, okay, this man might be guilty, this man might be innocent, these allegations may hold weight or not. It's really about the fact that he was deported and sent to a foreign prison without due process. I was talking to a colleague earlier, and we were talking about what an unprecedented situation this is. Now, in our country, we have had instances where individuals have been deported by mistake, but never before have we had an individual deported by mistake, sent to a foreign prison where virtually for 30 plus days, our government and his family, his American family, I might add, has lost all contact with him. That's not something that we've dealt with. So this is new territory. Again, I want to add, the administration, the White House is not walking away from this. I would even take it a step further as to say that I don't know that they would backtrack or do anything different. I think they see this as a very strong issue for them because it's connected to immigration. That's something that the president and his administration feel very strongly about. It's something that he is polling very highly on, at least over the past couple months. So this is going to get messy. This is going to continue to get messy. And this is a very, very sensitive issue, politically speaking, and of course, legally in this country, and will be for some time.
All right, Quinton Hitchcock, thank you for joining us with your perspective on that story. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has warned Harvard University that it could lose its ability to enroll foreign students if it doesn't meet demands from the Trump administration. This comes days after the Trump administration froze $2.2 billion in funding for defying Trump's campus demands. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem sent a scathing letter this week calling for detailed records on Harvard's foreign students, including information on any allegedly illegal or violent activities. Noem also announced the cancellation of over $2.7 million in grants to the prestigious university and accused it of creating a hostile learning environment for Jewish students amidst pro-Palestinian activism. This escalates the Trump administration's push to exert political supervision over U.S. schools and their faculties. Trump administration has threatened universities in the U.S. with federal funding cuts over pro-Palestinian campus protests against Israel's devastating military assault on Gaza after the October 7th attacks. Harvard has rejected the administration's demands, with University President Alan Garbus vowing that the university will not surrender its independence or constitutional rights. Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, is joining us live from Washington, D.C. in the United States. Thank you very much for being with us today, Raymond Vickery. What do you make of this, war between Harvard University and the Trump administration, growing with each passing day?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I think this is a very crucial time in the United States and really for freedom and democracy around the world. Since World War II, the United States, along with other great democracies like India, have been in the forefront of promoting not only peace and prosperity through institutionalized rule of law, but really respect for human rights, freedom, freedom of speech, press, and all of those which we have held dear in the United States. That is changing at this point. This attack on Harvard is really an attack on opposition thinking at all. The idea is that you should fall in line with President Trump and his views, or you're not worthy of being an independent organization. So the United States at this point needs help from other democracies, from people around the world who value freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And I would point out the attack on Harvard is not an isolated incident. There was the attack on other institutions of higher learning. Vice President J.D. Vance has said that higher education is the enemy. And the reason for this is, as was pointed out perhaps or foretold with George Orwell's 1984, is the first thing you want to do when you establish an authoritarian regime is to do away with thought which does not comply with yours. So this is a very difficult time. One hopes that our institutions will hold. We have a separation of powers, a judicial system, a legislative branch, which are supposed to act as a check on the president and the executive. We're now engaged in a great struggle to see whether or not those institutions will hold. And we need help, quite frankly, from others who value independence, who value freedom, who value the ability to think for yourselves. But this is going forward not only with Harvard, with Columbia University, with Princeton University, with University of Pennsylvania, and then it's spread over into the media as well, attacks on the public broadcasting system, the National Public Radio, in order to be able to consolidate power in President Trump and his allies.
So how do you see this, moving forward, Raymond Vickery? Is Harvard University unlikely to back down, as we've seen in the letter, of course, that their president sent out recently to students and faculty? Or do you believe that they could face, of course, now even foreign students perhaps getting affected by now these homeland security measures if they are enacted already? Reportedly, they're losing about $2 billion in grants.
Well, I don't see Harvard backing down at this point, and knock on wood, it's not going to happen. I think that what will happen is that it will go to the courts and there will be a fight for due process. But as I said earlier, the question now is whether or not the judicial branch is going to be able to stand up and defend basic principles in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, the independence of organizations from the executive branch. And the jury, as they say, is still out on that. The Supreme Court has given mixed signals. One was when they gave a grant of immunity to presidents for anything done is official acts, and of course, almost anything the president done can be closed as an official act. On the other hand, as has just been pointed out by Mr. Hitchcock, the Supreme Court seems to be standing up in a case of this deportation to El Salvador. So now it'll be faced eventually with this. It'll wind its way through the administrative and court proceedings. But whether or not we're going to be able to hold or not remains to be seen. The ultimate ability of the legislative branch to step in will be tested next year, of course, when we have midterm elections.
Okay.
The problem is that unless you have a strong judicial branch, there can be changes to manipulate elections. But the attack on Harvard is not isolated. I don't expect Harvard to fold. There have been other universities who have folded to some extent and gone along, but I think that at this point, Harvard, with its very large endowment and its long historic attachment to freedom and the basics of the American Constitution, is not going to fold.
All right. Appreciate you joining us, Raymond Vickery, with your perspective on that big story. Now, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today to discuss a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, aiming to align U.S. and European efforts to end the war. Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky's chief of staff, were also in Paris for talks with U.S. and European delegations. Despite the U.S. President Trump's push for peace, Russia continues deadly strikes in Ukraine, including recent drone and missile attacks. Macron is leading efforts for a coordinated European response, focusing on a ceasefire, peacekeepers and Ukraine's security framework. Rubio's trip includes discussions on the Middle East, Iran's nuclear program and Ukraine. French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu will also be meeting with U.S. officials to discuss similar issues. Meanwhile, Russia is dismissing the Paris talks, accusing Europe of prolonging the war. Ukrainian President Zelensky, meanwhile, has urged to increase pressure on Russia to end the three-year war. A Russian drone attack, meanwhile, on Dnipro has killed 3, including a child, and injured 30, 5 of them children. According to regional officials, strikes damaged homes, a student residence and a food plant. In Kharkiv region, a missile attack injured 2 in Izium, previously occupied by Russian forces. In fact, Dr. Veselin Ivanov-Popovky, Professor and Vice Dean, Jindal Global Law School, is joining us live on the broadcast. Welcome and thank you very much for being with us today, Professor Popovky. Your first, expectations from these talks. What is likely to be on the agenda in Paris as officials from the U.S. meet with their counterparts from Europe, and in particular France tries to lead efforts on Ukraine?
It's a very encouraging news. Finally, the big European powers, and it's not only France, but also British Foreign Minister David Lammy and German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is there. The Ukrainian Chief of Staff Ermak is there. This is the correct format for talks, and finally United States administration admitted that the way to talk is not with Kremlin, with Putin, which achieved nothing in the last 3 months. We don't see any progress. We didn't see a single day of ceasefire since Witkoff is going to Moscow. They met in Saudi Arabia. All these endless negotiations with Moscow achieved nothing, zero. So the only way forward, and finally the US administration realizes that, is to join British, French, German and other meaningful countries to talk about that, and not only about Russia, Ukraine, but as you mentioned, also about Iranian nuclear issue and other problems around the world. So this is the right step in the right direction. I'm sure there will be many more in this format and not with Russia.
Yes. Professor Popovky, why is it taking so long to bring about this ceasefire? Despite US's efforts, Russia is continuing their attacks in Ukraine.
You answer your question, Uday. because of Russia. It takes long because Moscow doesn't make a single step towards any meaningful negotiation. They are willing to continue the war. They continue war crimes every week. They keep hitting civilian targets, keep killing Ukrainian children and civilians. So Moscow is definitely interested in prolongation of the war and not in negotiations. Everything they say doesn't make any sense. They are talking about long-term peace, but in their terms, Ukraine needs to disappear as an independent country, and nobody in the world will allow that.
All right, Professor Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on this story. And on that note, we are going to slip into a very short break. We will continue to bring you more news and updates from around the world right here on NewsX World.